it is that time once again to be returning back to the streets of Victorian London, as in today's Doctor Who Big Finish audio drama review, I'm going to be taking a look at the fourth series of Jago and Litefoot, starring Trevor Baxter as Professor George Litefoot, alongside Christopher Benjamin as Henry Gordon Jago. Now, of course, previously within this series, I have reviewed the first three series of Jago and Litefoot, alongside the companion chronicle story, The Mahogany Murders, as well as their debut episode, The Talons of Wang Chiang. Of course, naturally, this box set is available to be purchased on the Big Finish website. The physical box set is £34.99 and the download is £29.99. Now, the whole point of this series is basically taking a look at Jago and Litefoot from the very beginning until the very end and reviewing them in order, because it is a fun set of adventures. It is a spin-off that I'm incredibly passionate about, and if you haven't checked out the series as of yet, I highly recommend doing so. It is by far one of the best things that Big Finish do, of course, produce. Now, I did, of course, previously last time take a look at Jago and Litefoot Series 3. I say that because I reviewed it only yesterday. I did, in fact, binge listen the entirety of Jago and Litefoot Series 4 in the space of 24 hours, because that is how self-isolation in England has currently got me coping. Victorian adventures and Jago and Litefoot, and that is what is getting me through. So I do not quite know when this video will be going up. I know it will be going up at some point, and it's been a delight so far to in fact be revisiting this series, as I did originally film this review about 3 years ago, and it just never happened. It never appeared on the channel, and by the time I came around to editing it, my hair was literally that short, and it would have just looked ridiculous being uploaded so many years later. So I've decided to reapproach the series once again and start off from where we left off, essentially. So as per usual, this box set does of course contain 4 separate stories featuring Jago and Litefoot. However, there is an overall plot arc for this series, so we do have a lot of independent stories, some of which are very unusual this time round, with an overarching theme and of course a brand new villain to go up against, the Infernal Investigators. So without further ado, let's take a look at the first story of Jago and Litefoot Series 4. The cover art for Jago and Litefoot Series 4 offers a rather grey and stylish approach, having the logo in the very middle, this time round in silver and blue, and of course Kempston and Hardwick at either side, along with the main characters and the team for this series at the very top. It's very nice, and does of course also have reference to the Sandmen within the later half of this series. This series continues the rather gorgeous looking cover art illustrations that are very unique, however suit the Jago and Litefoot style, starting off Jago and Litefoot Series 4 with Jago in Love, as written by Nigel Fairs. So this series of Jago and Litefoot starts off in a very similar manner to that of the previous series, where we have a direct continuation from the previous box set. It's not necessarily that we have a plot being expanded upon from the previous series, we just had a cliffhanger within the previous box set that then leads into the plot arc of this series and the main foundation, I suppose, of all 4 adventures. That said, Series 3 and Series 4 are 2 brilliant seasons. It is almost an era within Jago and Litefoot, because we have the Infernal Investigators accompanied by Louise Jameson as Leela. Of course, we have the foundation of that within Series 3, and then we have that expanded upon within this series, as due to her time ring no longer working, as she has been sent by Romana from Gallifrey to sort out the time leakages within Series 3, we now have her stranded in Victorian London for a further 4 investigations with Jago and Litefoot. So it's great to see an expansion upon Series 3, and it allows her character more time to develop, and I really do love the way that she contributes to this series, and especially her relationship with Ellie Higson. So Jago in Love, as written by Nigel Fairs, is the first episode of this series, and it's a breath of fresh air. Quite literally, it is a breath of coastal fresh air, as Jago and Litefoot decide to basically get away from Victorian London and have a holiday after everything that has happened throughout the previous box sets. In particular, of course, Series 3 did personally affect Jago and Litefoot. In the previous story, Chroniclasm, we had a rather personal attack on Litefoot because one of the aliens of the piece kind of landed directly within his home, and likewise with the third episode of that series, we had a rather personal story relating to Jago's relationship with the theatre. Jago in Love once again expands on that. It challenges the relationship between Jago and Litefoot in a way that we've not seen so far within this series. It is a very personal episode and kind kind of sets out a theme for this series relating to relationships and love and kind of the appreciation of different people around you. So this episode sees the infernal investigators plus Leela travel to Brighton and have a little bit of a fun holiday. However, naturally, with it being Jago Litefoot, everything doesn't end up being nice for long. So the opening of this box set is really great because we get to see them basically having fun around Brighton. They go to a theatre, witness somebody singing, who is Abigail, who she becomes more prominent in the later half of the plot. However, it is great to have a chill start to this series, and it's a great insight into the era, I suppose, of having these Victorian people going to the coast, very much like how people would have done back in Victorian times in order to escape the busy bustle of the city with all of the pollution. And I really did love the way that this episode built up an atmosphere, a domestic atmosphere of Victorian coastal life, I suppose, and I love the inclusion of Abigail, who once again gave an interesting insight into kind of the singers and entertainers of that period that would have been in the likes of Brighton and Blackpool, singing to entertain the people who have come to the coast for the day. And naturally, due to her being a theatrical person, she instantly attracts the attention of Jago, and basically we see Jago and Litefoot's relationship put on the line because he instantly falls for her and kind of discards Litefoot and Leela in a rather unusual manner, and let's just say their relationship goes incredibly quickly. It goes from only just meeting each other to planning on getting married very, very quickly, and because of that, Litefoot does get left out. He has a few problems of his own. He gets possessed by the ghost of a small girl, as you do when you go to Brighton, and Leela is the one that needs to put everything back together. She is kind of the main person in the story that brings the infernal investigators back to each other again, and she has a very prominent role throughout this story. I also loved her way of interacting with Litefoot in the early half, because it's shown kind of that rather tribal nature within her character, but also at the same time the way that she is learning and the way that Litefoot is almost acting as a teacher to her. Something very unusual for this episode as well, we are introduced to the villains of the piece at the very, very end, who then go on to being the other three stories as well. So something to say about Series 4 that is unlike the previous series is that the plot arc this time round is very developed and is very focused on the individual stories and has a lot more impact, as opposed to having individual cases with not too much relevance within the early half of the series. I think that it says a lot, considering that this was a re-listen for me of Jago and Litefoot Series 4. Out of all of the episodes of this series, this is one of the episodes that stood out. I think that is because of the major location change, so I really do appreciate this story for that. It is a great way to start off this series, and I think that generally Nigel Fairs has written a very intricate, detailed and emotional story. Beautiful Things, written by John Dorney. We once more see John Dorney return to Jago and Litefoot for the second story of the box set, being Beautiful Things. Now this episode is a bit more traditional Jago and Litefoot, and I would dare say is the story of the box set that for me is kind of the most average, and that is not to say that that's a bad thing, it just returns back to the traditional Jago and Litefoot. As an example, we have Litefoot going back to the morgue for this story and doing a little bit of examination on dead bodies after Conrad Asquith's Inspector Quick decides to show him some unusual goings on and some bodies that are just standing motionless, and as a result shutting down a few moments later. And it is nice to return to that normal traditional concept of Jago and Litefoot that we did see within Series 1, because the previous two series have kind of adapted Jago and Litefoot. Series 3 was very science fiction, and it is nice to be stripped back to basics. This time round we have Oscar Wilde and his wonderful writings, and the reintroduction of Professor Claudius Dark as portrayed by none other than Colin Baker, or as we also know him as the Sixth Doctor, and he is under a guise for this box set as Professor Claudius Dark, and he is trying to coax over the confidence, I suppose, and the relationship and trust of Jago and Litefoot, and it's not going particularly well, so he decides to give them a theatre ticket to that of Oscar Wilde that sold out a long, long time ago. And once again, much like the previous story, we get to see Leela, Ellie and Jago go off to the theatre and experience Oscar Wilde Wilde on stage, and it is a great way to showcase Victorian entertainment and really making you feel like you are a part of the story. I love the way that Leela didn't have a clue what was going on. She had no interest, and she thought that the words that they were saying were absolutely dull and diabolical. Meanwhile, you had Ellie, who was kind of appreciating it, however not quite knowing why. And then you've got Jago just going along with it because naturally he's a theatre impresario, and because it is Oscar Wilde, he is, I suppose, loving it. And we have Lightfoot, who is a little bit reluctant to go along because it's a Claudius Dark ticket, and he doesn't want to bow down to him just yet because he doesn't quite know who he is. So there's a really nice balance between the story of the different approaches of the two infernal investigators, and of course we are introduced in the later half to a plot where bodies or people are going to this private meeting and they are not coming out alive. Essentially, there has been a series of killings that has attracted the attention of the police, and we get to see a little bit of involvement of creativity and the creative arts. We have drama, we have writing, and we have actual physical art itself, which is a great link to Oscar Wilde and his appreciation of that art movement, I suppose. And we have a monster that is entirely focused around the idea of art. And the thing that I love about this story is, once again, it continues the appreciation of the theme of the box set being around love, because we have a brilliant scene at the very end of the story where Lightfoot says he was preying on love, the secret kind of love that doesn't dare speak its name. Naturally, this is Victorian London, and homosexuality in that time wouldn't have been something that you could talk about publicly. And this story acknowledges that very, very briefly. However, it was a nice theme that was kind of intertwined throughout this story that I didn't certainly realise until the very end of the episode. So it was a very nice touch and added an extra level. But as I say, for me, it was one of the episodes that didn't really stand out as much as the other episodes within this series, and as per usual, we did have the reintroduction of the villains of the piece once again at the very end of the story. However, this time around coming face to face with Jago and Lightfoot, leading into what is essentially a two-part series finale. So as you can tell, we're only already on episode 2, and we've got that direct involvement of the villains of Mr Kempston and Mr Hardwick, a duo of villains that are absolutely brilliant, and I really did love them. Next up, we have the one and only The Lonely Clock, written by Matthew Sweet. This is the moment within the Jago and Lightfoot spin-off series where everything is up to notch, because we have the reintroduction of the Doctor at the very end of this story, and The Lonely Clock is one of my personal favourite episodes within Jago and Lightfoot because it shows and encapsulates everything that I love about the series. I think that we have a brilliant focus on this story around Jago and Lightfoot and the skills that they possess, because we get to see them in this story separated off from Leela and Ellie, and they have to basically figure out what is going on as they are locked within a tube train that is buzzing around the network constantly. And obviously I love the London Underground, so this story appeals to me on another level because it's got a train in it. However, it's a great story that shows them working under pressure. We have a dead body, we have time going wrong, we have time going back in time, forward in time. Meanwhile, you have Ellie Higson and Leela off on their own investigations. So not only is it showing the skills of Jago and Lightfoot, but also expanding upon the skills of the sort of less integral characters of the series. Ellie Higson is an absolute joy, and this episode in itself, some of my favourite moments were in fact down to Ellie and Louise Jameson as Leela. We have them going off with a girl, Winnie O'Connor, and they need to figure out what is going on because she has killed her partner earlier on in the evening, and they need to try and track down Kempston and Hardwick because it turns out they are lawyers pretty much and will give her legal advice. However, obviously not everything is what it seems. It's funny because, as I've mentioned before, I've listened to Jago and Lightfoot series for a number of years ago. However, instantly as soon as I started listening to this story again, I was instantly hooked. It has been written in a way that is just so enticing. I absolutely loved it from the very beginning, seeing them being thrown almost onto the tube train or directed there by Kempston and Hardwick, and basically the entire episode is showcasing the power that the main villains of the story have, getting Jago and Lightfoot where they want them and want to create a time distortion that is of course going to get the attention of Claudius Dark, the Doctor himself. However, of course, naturally at the very end of the story, the Doctor has other plans, things together, both Jago and Lightfoot and Doctor Who, and I like that it has happened so late on within the series, because we've already had 3 whole series of Jago and Litefoot that has been focused around building that relationship. Then we had the slight introduction of Leela, meaning that we had that first anchor to Doctor Who, and now we've got Colin Baker coming in as the main anchor to the show. However, by that point we already have that backstory of the characters, we already have a invested interest within Jago and Litefoot, and it's not in the similar case to say that of Class, where they just decided to throw in the Doctor within the first story in order to basically get some attention, explain the narrative, and say that these are your main protagonists. You like both of the characters in their own right, and almost you're just as happy to see Jago and Litefoot meet the Doctor as, say, the Doctor coming into Jago and Litefoot. They are both equal sort of bodies in their own right by this point. This episode, as with the previous one, of course deals with the emotional side of stuff. Of course, Winnie has killed her partner, so she is dealing with that grief, but also at the same time we get some brilliant scenes within the Red Tavern as she gets that grief and decides to basically drown it in alcohol. So we have all of these characters going off, and I just love the way that Ellie and Leela work together. I think that their bond is incredibly tight. Ellie is a woman, and she doesn't really have many female friends. Of course, Jago and Litefoot are very close to her. However, because they are male and because they have different jobs, they ain't barmaids or anything like that, they kind of have a sense of detachment from Ellie. However, when Leela comes along, they kind of both help each other out, they both learn things off each other, and this episode is kind of a final hurrah for them, especially considering that the next episode is the final one to feature Leela. However, I just love this story, I really do. I can't really explain the full narrative itself, because that will reveal the overall plot arc of this series and the things that go down. However, the reveal of the 6th Doctor at the very end is a brilliant cliffhanger. I absolutely loved it, and I loved the realisation in the voices of Jago and Litefoot as they realise that this is the man that they met so many years ago and brought them together. I think that it is a perfect special story. As I say, it's thoroughly enjoyable, and if you've liked any of the episodes within the previous box sets or like Jago and Litefoot, this story is a must. The Lonely Clock, as written by Matthew Sweet, is definitely up there as one of my favourite episodes of Jago and Litefoot ever, because Jago and Litefoot are brilliant. It features a train, we have some good old Victorian murder, Ellie's hilarious, Leela is brilliant, what is not to like? And then you have the icing on the cake of Colin Baker coming in. Obviously that is why Jago and Litefoot is my favourite spin-off series. And Series 4 concludes rather dramatically with The Hourglass Killers, written by Justin Richards. Oh look, it's Colin Baker. So it is now time to be taking a look at the conclusion of the series, The Hourglass Killers, as written by Justin Richards. Now this episode builds on everything, once again, that we've had built up throughout this series. Unlike, say, Series 3, when you had those individual time leakages, adventure kind of things, which were all obviously directly related to the plot arc, however they were still individual adventures in their own right. You could kind of listen to them separately and still appreciate it without having too many loose ends relating to the overall plot arc of the series. Series 4, as I say, has taken a much different approach. This time round, the final episode does very much feel like a final chapter. It is the end of an era for Jago and Litefoot, as we have the final episode to feature Leela within the series, sadly. And we do, of course, also have the reuniting of the Doctor with Jago and Litefoot, and kind of them showing him everything that they have learnt so far, and I think that part of him is very, very impressed by what they've done, however not surprised because he knows that they are absolutely brilliant anyway. But this series is, as I said, building on everything that we've seen so far within the previous 3 stories. Naturally, everything that has gone on has related to the plans of Kempston and Hardwick, and this episode sees the focus on them. Of course, the previous story was only about getting the Doctor's attention, and now we have them putting their plan into full action, and we get to see them basically working with the creatures of the Sandmen, and the whole concept of their character is around time and distorting time and wanting to take over absolutely everything and anything. We see Litefoot separated from Jago throughout this story. Litefoot goes off with the Doctor and Leela, and then we have Jago with Ellie Higson, and basically they need to wander around London pretending to be the Doctor and Leela in order to distract Kempston and Hardwick from the actual Doctor and Leela, and Litefoot are currently in fact fact up in Bedfordshire trying to essentially stop the main villains of the piece, which does naturally lead to quite a few hilarious moments within the early half of the story, with Jago and Ellie kind of pretending to be your stereotypical doctor and companion of the time. So we have those natural tropes in there of sort of Ellie asking, "What is going on?" and then the doctor being all British gentleman. It's all very funny and a great sort of commentary of Doctor Who as a whole. And then you have Litefoot as well, who once again is a brilliant companion to the Doctor. I was in fact quite surprised at how well Litefoot and the Sixth Doctor work together, because both of them can be rather stern characters at times. They're both like their own way, and they are both very, very intelligent. And normally when a character like that is alongside the Sixth Doctor, they both kind of clash. But I think the brilliant thing with Colin is that the infernal investigators and the Sixth Doctor just go hand in hand. It is obvious they are the Doctor and Jago Litefoot pairing that I instantly go to in my head, which is surprising given that they first appeared within a Fourth Doctor story. It works so well with Colin, and that does of course also show within the next few releases as a part of the Jago Litefoot series, extending out into the Doctor Who universe releases with Voyage to a New World and Voyage to Venus. Of course, this was also the first series finale of the Jago Litefoot spin-off series to not be written by Andy Lane, and to be honest I think that Justin Richards did a very good job. I thought that the series itself felt very much like a Sherlock crime series. The reveal of the big villain at the end, and the reveal that they've been sort of manipulating everything to get everything to this point within the series. It feels grand, it feels explosive, which leads on to a brilliant final scene with them all sat around the Red Tavern, because naturally, regardless of what the infernal investigators face during their daytime, everything always ends at the Red Tavern for pints all round, and it kind of summarises where this series has started off and where it has ended. As I mentioned at the very start of this review, Series 3 and Series 4 go hand in hand because you have Leela as a part of the team and you get to see that relationship blossom throughout both of the series, and when it does come to her leaving at the very end, it does genuinely feel like the end of an era, but due to the presence of the Doctor, yes, it is the end of an era. However, it is arguably the beginning of a whole new era of Jago Litefoot stories, throws them essentially into a whole new realm entirely. And that does of course bring to an end Jago and Litefoot Series 4. Overall, an incredibly strong box set. I must admit at the very beginning, when re-listening to this series, as much as I did on my first listen in fact, I did wonder where this series was going, what was the point of it, and I do think that it does take a little bit of time to get the main plot rolling. Of course you have those little hints in there to Kempston Hardwick early on, however I think that when you've listened to the whole box set and reflect on the whole piece as one big story, I think that the appreciation of this series overall grows, because it is essentially lots of little pieces as a part of one big puzzle, and because of that it makes for a really satisfying conclusion. The box set that I binge listened within the space of 24 hours, so it's definitely one of those ones that is entertaining, fun, gripping, lots of drama, lots of emotions, and one that is re-listenable as well, which sometimes can't be said for other Big Finish series. Once you've kind of had the big reveals in there, it kind of loses some of that listenable factor, I suppose, if that's even a word. I think what it is with Jago Litefoot is you can listen to it over and over again, and of course Series 4 does conclude with Jago Litefoot going off in the TARDIS with the Sixth Doctor for some adventures, meaning that the next part of this series I will be stepping away directly from the Jago Litefoot box sets as a whole, and in fact taking a look at two Doctor Who special releases, being the Voyage to a New World and Voyage to Venus, both of which are 1 hour episodes featuring the Sixth Doctor and can be bought singly on the Big Finish website, but I suppose we will be taking a look at them next time. And after that, we'll of course be going into a very unique era of Jago Litefoot, and one that I have very fond memories of listening to first time round, but I suppose all of that is for the future. So thank you very much for watching this review. I hope you have enjoyed it. If you have any questions about the Doctor Who Jago and Litefoot spin-off series on Big Finish, please do feel free to leave them in the comments section below. I'll try my best to answer them at some point in the near future. And do of course stay tuned on the Host Productions for brand new Doctor Who content each and every week. So as always, thanks for watching, stay safe, all corks, and I will see you all next time. Bye for now.